The following presentation was given at the Unitarian Universalist congregation of Tupelo in Tupelo, Mississippi. All are welcome to join us on Sundays at 11 a.m. at 1301 Marshall Street in Tupelo.
So obviously you probably all realize that this is February, which has been designated as Black History Month, and as we all know, in the current atmosphere of our country, as has always been the case, accusations of racism and so forth are flying thick and fast. Our own denomination is at the headquarters and big conference level in a state of some turmoil about just exactly how we approach within our own smaller communities issues of racial justice. I'm sure you're aware that there is a part of the Black Lives Matter movement that is distinctly connected up with Unitarian Universalism. And there's something else you may not be as aware of, although I think Reverend Edie addresses this in some of her sermons. There's a huge push within the UUA for congregations, and therefore obviously individuals, to get involved with various training programs based on a theory called critical race theory, which am not, frankly, in disagreement with. What I am in some disagreement with is the assumption that we can somehow force people to become less racist by having them come to a seminar. It seems to me that how people change is through relationship. And if for some reason our lives are set up in such a way that it's not possible to necessarily always have a lot of relationships directly with people of different racial or ethnic or other differences, we have some excellent tools at our disposal to, in a way, understand and be in better relationship with people through cultural understandings. We can read books. We can go to movies. We can listen to music and read poetry and find that we can get into the lives of people that are very different from perhaps our particular life experience. Even people within a particular race or ethnic group are not, no one person is ever representative of any group any more than I represent all women or even all elderly and plump ladies. We are all very highly individual. And I believe that in addition to the value of interacting with people socially, in work settings, et cetera, who are different from us in their backgrounds and their histories, doing it through literature is a splendid way to get a feel for things that is more than the intellectual. Through that, as our poem about the blues says, we get to confront some realities that are not our own. We can have aspects of feeling the despair of others who are experiencing problems that we ourselves may not experience. And in American culture in particular, it seems to me that through the music, which we just heard a little bit of the Coltrane, we heard a little Charlie Parker earlier, we're singing spirituals which have some blues elements. Through that, which is pretty ubiquitous in the culture, we can pick up on something of what people different than us may experience. And I think even the white people that have taken up being blues and jazz musicians can almost not do it without being exposed to deeper elements of the tradition. But it's in literature that we can really, really, really have spelled out for us what experience is that can make us, I think, empathetic and social justice warriors for better racial relations and relations with all those people who we see as quote-unquote different from us. Because in literature and movies and plays, we see actual people. They can become alive to us. How many of you have seen the movie The Color Purple? All right. those of you who haven't, you need to correct that problem soon. I suggest, I'm sure that's easy to locate. How many of you have seen the movie based on August Wilson's play Fences? It was about 3 years ago. It played all over the place. Denzel Washington, very popular actor. Well, that is a must, because I want to talk a little bit about August Wilson. So August Wilson is an American playwright who dedicated his life. He died much too soon in his 60s. He came out of Pittsburgh. He dedicated his life to writing plays about the Black experience in America. Sadly, of course, a lot of people do not go to the theater, but now, because Denzel has taken an interest in August life's work, the movie Fences was very well received and pretty well made enough money that other projects can happen. Wilson wrote 10 plays set at a different decade, mostly based in Pittsburgh, where he grew up. And every one of them, there are a few recurring characters. There are a few elderly people that are young in the earlier, they don't necessarily, he didn't write them in chronological order, but now that all 10 have been written and produced, you could read them in chronological order, which I have done in my life, and I've seen a number of them performed in various cities. And to me, there is just no better way to get into what the Black experience is like for those who are not closely aligned to it than seeing these plays or seeing the one movie so far. My understanding is that Denzel Washington has some sort of an arrangement. It was with HBO, now I think it's moved over to Netflix, since they seem to be making most of the new movies, to eventually come up with some sort of either full-length movie or possibly some kind of series project that will bring all of August Wilson to the forefront. But the story in Fences fits very well with our paradigm of what blues and jazz tell us about life. The reality is it's a story of a garbage man, a man who lives his life, has a wife and kids, a son from a previous marriage and a younger son. He was once upon a time a baseball player who matured too soon to get into the post-Jackie Robinson era, where he could have been playing in the major leagues. Very talented player. And we find some of these things that the blues presents, the feelings of despair, the exploration of the hurts and discords of his life playing out in this play turned into a movie. He wants to be the driver of the garbage trucks rather than the person who simply picks up the garbage and puts it into the truck. And through a long series of machinations, he finally achieves that life goal. He has a reasonably happy second marriage, but somehow the life at home and the need to mend fences, from which the title comes, is off-putting to him. It reminds him too much of his sometimes degrading job, and so he eventually acquires a mistress. He also has a son from a first marriage in the play who crops up periodically, who feels put upon and mistreated, and he has a son in the second marriage who also has a lot of talent for baseball. But because our hero has been beaten down by life and had his own dream snatched away, although he does realize his dream of being a driver, he does not really support this younger son. He's constantly telling him, no, you may not have what it takes, keep your job, don't go for that dream. So we see in that blues and jazz those motifs of the despair circulating around the hope. And like all the blues characters, the hero of Fences roams up these alleys and dead ends, drinking too much, spending more time with his mistress than he does with his wife. And then he gets pushed down into a very dark void because his mistress becomes pregnant and then dies in childbirth. And of course, he's nice enough to feel responsible for the kids, so he brings the little girl home and asks his wife if she will let them raise his daughter. And what she said, it's a line that just echoes in my life, in my mind, and I think it's probably the same in the play and the movie. She says, yes, I'll take care of your daughter, but you are now a womanless man. In other words, she feels that she's no longer his wife, and his mistress have died. Now, we're left, thank God the play doesn't end there. We go back and come to another scene 8 years later, in which case they have apparently somewhat reconciled. The two boys have gone on to claim their lives, found forgotten and buried truths in their experience and looking at their father's life. And they have discovered that they can find their own hope. And we see in this play what this analysis of the blues says, the discovery of a new harmony. The father has died, but the family has become united in the 8 years since we've left them before, and they are united in his death. And the little girl by the other woman is now really an official part of the family. So this is just to sort of see how this plays out. August Wilson himself said repeatedly that without the blues and jazz, he would never have been a writer. He would never have embarked on his 10-play opus. There are so many other African-American writers and artists, movie makers, etc., along with the jazz and blues musicians that have colored American life so much. But one of the most interesting stories that shows how much we have, as a culture, appropriated sometimes the culture of the blues, jazz, and of course eventually rock and roll as well, is encapsulated in this Alice Walker story that I read the tiny excerpt from. If you just picked up this book and you didn't know this and you weren't a big fan of all those music genres, you might not know this, but this story, which purports to be a fictional story, although it's pretty clear that it's based on the life of Tupelo great Elvis Presley, is the prototype for Trainer, and you can even see on the cover, it's very clear you see a large black lady behind a figure that can only be interpreted as the king of rock and roll. But the story, and there are a couple of stories that relate to this, is a classic of appropriation of a culture not our own, and to some extent exploitation, but also an opportunity to get those cultural phenomenon out in the larger world. So the real story is this. Big Mama Thornton was indeed a large lady who was a blues singer who wrote the song originally and sang the song Hound Dog, which everybody has always puzzled about exactly what that song meant. And it was indeed purchased from her, and of course it was one of Elvis's early hits. So the story is based on what could have happened. It isn't what really happened, but as someone said about narrative, it's the story that should have happened, and it embodies a certain truth, even though it isn't the exact historical story. So this story, 1955, and this has the Elvis stand-in Trainer and his manager, who is obviously a stand-in for Colonel Parker, show up at the actual home of Gracie May, who stands in for Big Mama Thornton, and offer her $500 for the rights to her song, Hound Dog. They don't specify that in the story, but that's clearly what it's based on. And she agrees, and then they offer to buy up all of the existing copies of her version of it, meaning that only the Elvis character and the manager, or whoever else they play, will ever hear her original version. Now, this didn't happen in real life, but again, it should have. In the story, the Elvis character comes back years later and says, you never did tell me what that song was about. I've sung it for years. I've made millions of dollars on it. In the meantime, he gives her presents along, as Elvis was prone to do, cars and things like that. But I don't know what it means. And she's perpetually telling her partners, who shift over the time. One of her partners dies, and she has a new one. The boy is sad. The boy's singing something. He doesn't even know what it means. It doesn't belong to him. And all of his fans are screaming and crying, and they don't know what it means either, because, it really isn't their song. So he perpetually comes back to visit Gracie May in the story, and eventually asks her to be on a TV show with him. She talks about how he has her sing that song with all of her feeling and all of her understanding of it, and yet the audience, for the most part, doesn't get it. And then, of course, he sings his version, which is almost identical to hers in phrasing and nuance, and they go crazy. So to me, that ending that I read when she says, one day this is going to be a pitiful country, it seems to me epitomizes this problem that Americans love the sort of products of a lot of aspects of African American culture, but don't really understand that it can't ever completely belong to them, and they don't understand the feelings and the life experience necessarily behind it. And it seems to me that for us as Unitarians, in a denomination that is seriously looking at our terrible history on racial and class issues, that many of us could benefit more from reading more books by African American writers, novelists, poets, and there's so many. If I start, I'll never stop. Toni Morrison, of course, many of you know because she won the Nobel Prize. Alice Walker's a woman that's been popular. Richard Wright, who wrote Native Son and Black Boy, who's from Mississippi. And Ralph Ellison, who wrote one of the classics, Invisible Man. And James Baldwin, of course, wrote extensively about racial issues. And there are many, many young, new novelists. It seems to me that through an understanding of people's lives through literature, plays, theater, movies, and listening to the music, it seems to me that that creates a more of a feeling response, more empathy, more understanding, and less guilt than being asked to come to either a weekend or weeks and weeks of workshops where you're told how to think about race. It seems to me that it comes to us through our intuition, through our feeling, through our resonance with these forces which exist in everyone's life. All of us are poised between order and turmoil, faith that seems to be handed to us that we cannot control, and freedom to be agents, between light and darkness in our lives, between emotion and rational thought, between the spiritual and the physical. And it seems to me by understanding those similarities and universality, that's how we overcome prejudice, more so than through being put through a series of often guilt-inducing workshops. Just an opinion, controversial, let me point out, within the denomination at this point. I could possibly be tried for being a heretic if I were a full-time minister anymore. But that's how I came to appreciation of a culture that is not directly my own. Everybody I know that has pursued, that has seen things like the August Wilson plays, has read Black literature and poetry, and who's a lover of jazz and blues. I don't know anybody that has exposed themselves to that I think can be still considered to be pretty high, very high on any kind of a racist evaluation. So I suggest that you immerse yourself. First, make sure you see the color purple. Next, make sure you rent Fences through some format. And then I strongly suggest checking out and reading some things by Alice Walker, Richard Wright, and James Baldwin, and you will be a much better and more enlightened person for it. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the UUC of Tupelo's podcast. You can find us at uuctupeloms.org, on Facebook by searching for UUC Tupelo, or contact us by email at uuctupelocom@gmail.com. That's uuctupelocom@gmail.com. The UUC of Tupelo is a welcoming congregation who accept all people, regardless of creed, color, national origin, gender, or gender identity. We hope you have enjoyed this podcast, and as you head on your way, go in peace, believe in peace, create peace.